is tipped, and there you are. You're running for your life. You're a shooting star.
Everyone, welcome back. I'm Shayne Combs. He's Matt Combs. This is Expanding the Zone, show 70. Thank you, Dr. Chris Good, as always, for all the support. Matt, we're real excited about this particular show. It's our favorite time of year when we think tournament basketball. And it got us thinking back to show 49, One Shining Moment, where we had talked about some different things on the tournament trail once before, but that's been a while, and some new thoughts have come up and some different things. And what better time as the high school is getting close to that district level of play, and we're coming up on the March Madness brackets, just to talk a little bit about this. But again, check us out on YouTube. If you're listening over there on your podcast app, if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you. Again, go find us wherever you get your podcasts so you can listen that way as well. But again, can't thank you enough for the support. I know the last couple of weeks, a lot of the numbers been way up, and we can't thank you enough for the support. Check us out, SVC Sports Zone. You can find us just about anywhere on social media or there on YouTube. Again, it's Expanding the Zone. So, Matt, with some of that out of the way, the only other thing I should say is 100.9 FM radio, 7:30 a.m. Monday through Friday. Matt and myself have been helping JJ Hell there on Up and Adams Sports. It's about a 10 to 15 minute segment. Check us out there about 7:30 a.m. each and every morning to get all your local sports scores and stories and so forth. So exciting time. As I said, Matt, we're coming up on tournament basketball. Why don't you kind of take us through a little bit what we have in mind in terms of the format of tonight's show?
Well, we did this show, Shayne, about a year ago, right around this time, if I remember correctly. And it's crazy to think it was 21 shows ago. We've done quite a few shows since then, but really just talking about, we dove in and kind of talked about some of the things we think are important in terms of a team making a deep tournament run. So when we're talking about this, I think what we had in mind when we did this show was a run that maybe went, pretty far along, at least district finals, maybe regional, maybe even state. And I think we just were trying to prioritize some of the things we thought were important if you were trying to predict the success of a team along the tournament trail. If we were picking our bracket, so to speak, right, for the high school level, what are some of the things we thought were important? And we've never done a sort of a playback show. It's going to be kind of interesting as we play back sort of from our vault from show 49. But we also we're going to jump in between clips, you and I, tonight. As we watch these clips, we're going to jump in every now and then and comment on it, because obviously as time goes on, we have some new ideas too, and maybe we want to expand on a few of these things. So we think it'll be fun. We hope people enjoy it, and they could always go back and listen to the entire episode 49 of One Shining Moment if they want to do that too. So, but we're going to have quite a bit of it on here tonight. Like I said, just kind of bounce back and forth and make some comments. So Shayne, we'll go ahead and roll the tape, so to speak, and jump back into episode 49, One Shining Moment. Hope everybody enjoys.
I guess it leads us into the show here, Matt, as I was thinking back to our identity show and how that relates into to you go all year long. And as you said, some teams, it's their championship, and that's the next checklist thing that they go to the next step. For other teams, maybe it hasn't gone the way they wanted to. And tournament time's always that start over time, right? It's that second season, everybody's 0-0 type of record. I'm sure we've all given that speech to our kids before. So it's just an interesting thing I want to throw to you to start. If we are looking at the question directly throughout this entire show 49, what it takes to make a tournament run, where do you start with in terms of throwing out that one main point in terms of starting the list for those answers?
Yeah, for me, I had several points written down, and I don't know what I would say number one is, because I think there are things that are relatively obvious, Shayne, that you have to have a certain level of talent to make a tournament run, and you have to do some things within the game of basketball, fundamentally, right? Some of the fundamentals you have to be pretty sound in on both ends of the floor and all that. And maybe you might want to touch on some of those as we go. But I guess for me, one of the things that jumps out at me as teams get into these tournament runs is by the time you get to tournaments, all right, you've played hopefully 22 regular season games in high school, right around there. And, not to sound like, I think it was Dennis Green, like, you are what your record says you are, anything like that, but you are a little bit of who you are by this time. And what I mean by that is, whatever habits you've fallen into, whatever sort of tendencies you have, it's awful hard if you've done those for 3 months to be able to turn around and be something totally different than that, all of a sudden at the tournament level. And what I mean by that is, so like if you're a team, I always say this, if your longest winning streak all year long is 3 games, I think it's unlikely that you're going to run off 5 games or 6 games and make some state tournament trip. Whatever you've been able to accomplish in a regular season, it's pretty difficult to completely outdo that just a week after your regular season when tournaments start. Like, let me give you a different example, and then I'll turn it over to you and let you go for a little bit. But like, if you're a basketball team that, hey, on the year we're shooting 30% from the floor and averaging 51 points a game, the chances of you going on a 2-week stretch or a 3-week stretch in the tournament where you shoot 40% from the floor and average 65 points a game is not likely. Now, could you catch lightning in a bottle one night? And that's what makes tournaments great, right? That one night, you could do that, right? That one night, you could just play out of your mind. But in terms, I think what I'm talking about today, Shayne, is making tournament runs, right? Tournament success in terms of like making that deep special run to maybe the regional level. And it's tough to overcome some of those habits. If you're a team that turns it over a lot, are you all of a sudden going to take care of the ball tournament? I mean, it's some of these things sort of stick with you. And I guess, so when I look at a team, I look at their regular season and say, okay, what is this team? Who are they? And then based on that, how far can they really go? So Shayne, as we come out of that clip there, with my theory, as I talked a little bit on, the importance of if you're going to have a winning streak in the tournament, having at least had some of that success in the regular season, and how it's hard to do something in the tournament that you've never ever accomplished. And I talked a little bit there about the tendencies teams have, and if you had a tendency for 22 games, it's awfully hard to break that tendency, over the course of a couple weeks during a tournament run. Are these things you agree with, Shayne, or do you think I'm making a little too much of that, or maybe you have some different ideas off of that? Do you think that teams can just find that magic and do things they've never done all year long, or do you think there's something to what I said there?
It's hard not to say yes, I agree on the surface, just for sake of great discussion, because tournament time's so special. I guess I could throw out a couple things, maybe in the scheduling aspect, maybe division wise, you play against a lot higher division. Every year at the Division 3 or Division 4 tournament, a state tournament, it seems like you see a basketball team, you'll see a record that catches your eye, and then as you look down their schedule and their score results from throughout the year, you're like, dang, oh man, they play in a conference where they play these Division 2 schools or this or that or whatever. That could possibly play a role in it. Maybe there's been an injury. Maybe you've had some of those teams. I know I even played on one in high school where we had some young and old talent mixed, but the chemistry just was a little weird. It kind of came together at the end of the year, and we kind of pulled an upset or knocked them off. But again, we probably weren't tournament run ready, if that makes sense. We were good for a game or two, but probably not for a long run there in my sophomore year. So like it's hard to argue those things. I think there's always going to be some unique tournament examples, but on that one, it's hard not to look back at that and say, yeah, I'd have to agree.
In this clip, Shayne, coming up, you had actually mentioned, I had asked you to hit me with something from your list that you thought was important, and you talked a little bit about the importance of experienced guard play and having a little bit of star power, having that elite player, and so let's give this clip a listen.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think right at the top of my list, and I didn't want to be too blunt or too like over the top, but I think you have to state the obvious first. I think you have to have talent. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's one of those things where are there the Cinderella runs every now and then, sure, to the regional level or so forth, but let's be real honest. You have to be very, very talented. And if I were going to break that down into a couple areas, I think there's two things that come to my mind that I see. Number one has to be guard play, and then I would even stretch it out to I really think you have to have star power. And here's why I say that. I think what happens in the tournament play, things get a little bit more physical. Um, things usually officials want to call less fouls. And we're talking about we did a show a while back on the number of fouls that are called in basketball anyway. So when you
Right.
get to the tournament game, it even ramps up to another level. The ability to have guards that can just dribble, pass, and catch cleanly, and the higher their skill level is, probably the more physicality they can play through. I think it's very, very important in terms of taking care of the ball. But then I think star power is very, very important. I think what happens is if you every now and then you've got to have that one kid that can go get you a bucket. You got to have that kid that when the play breaks down, scouting is up. Let's face it, in today's time, by the time you get to tournament, as a coach, if you want to work hard enough on it, you could have 7, 8 on. Um, you have to have that one player that can just sometimes go get you one. And I've even seen examples where having that type of player can help you with the officials. I mean, look, officials are human. Officials are they're basketball fans, I assume. You know what I mean? That's why they do what they do, to stay in the game and to give back to the game and so forth. So I see that as a huge opportunity to um, maybe survive those runs, get to the free throw line that extra time. Sometimes, they want to be careful not to call that third foul in the second quarter, that fourth foul in the third quarter, foul that kid out in the fourth quarter. So when I think of talent level, that was the first thing on my list, and I had it kind of subplotted there as guard play, but then having that one star player that kind of as you start getting into that district final level, that makes you, I don't know if legitimate's the right word, Matt. Just your take on that. I mean, you kind of played that role on a team that made a special run. Like what's your take on that?
Yeah, I completely agree, Shayne, with the elite player thing, or that star player, because I think as you look at every level of basketball, that a lot of times, I mean, I think it's like I said before, it's understood that you have to have a certain level of talent to make a run. But I think that having that one elite player a lot of times is a game changer. You see it a lot at the college level. Think back, and I'm going back into the memory vault here a little bit, but like think back about some teams that won national championships that nobody really thought would when the tournament started, like a Syracuse team with Carmelo Anthony the one time, or the Connecticut team with Kemba Walker, right? I mean, you have,
Sure.
And a lot of people will say, and I've heard, guy like Jay Billis say it. I heard Dick Vitale used to say it. If you're going to win a national championship, you have to have a pro. You have to have a couple pros, typically. I mean, so if you take that down to the high school level, you have to have a couple of those elite players. You have to have, or at least one, or probably, to make a really deep run, multiple, elite players that can, just that they are different, and I mean, just that one player who can go maybe get to a basketball that another player can't, or a player that, I think in the girls game, sometimes that's even magnified, right? You'll find that team that just has that special player that nobody else has, that can sort of, and it's not even always about scoring 35 points. It's about, man, this kid just kind of gets to a couple loose balls that nobody else gets to a couple rebounds that nobody else gets, able to jump a passing lane and make a game-changing type of play. I just think that if you're really going to make that type of run, typically you have to have at least one of those elite kids So Shane, as we roll out of that segment there, I think you hit on a lot of good points. I too, on my list, I can remember when we did this show originally, had the elite player. As I mentioned in that clip, I gave some examples of at the college level how important it is, and I think at the high school level too, of having that star player that can kind of carry a team at times and can kind of go get you one when necessary. I look back at some of the tournament runs I've been a part of, and another thing that jumps out at me, obviously, that jumps out at me is having that player you can go to. But one of the things, Shane, too, that I think is so important in a tournament run, and we touched on it a little bit in that clip we just listened to, but I thought maybe we could dive into it just a little bit more, is having multiple guys that can do things, having multiple guys that can handle the ball. I think you mentioned that there with how the tournament's more physical, right? And less is called. You can't just depend on one guy. You have to have different people. I look back at so many of the tournament runs I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, both as a player and a coach. And one of the things that jumps out at me, Shane, is as I think back about big shots, big moments, just those game changing instances. A lot of times they involve quote unquote role players. They involve guys who maybe weren't the first team all leaguer. They involve a guy that might be considered the fourth or fifth starter, or in some cases might involve a guy who uh, who comes off the bench. I think about the tournament run that I was on in high school that you did the documentary on there last year, a couple years ago. The 1991 team I was on, and as we talked in that documentary, guys like Dan Cox, who was a starter but not one of our leading scorers, had 17 points in the regional semifinal game. We talked about guys like Jason Tress, who again was a starter but had to come off the bench one game due to an injury, and he hit a bunch of threes and kind of carried us through a moment. We talk about a guy like Jeff Miller, who obviously wasn't a role player. He's one of our all-league guys, but when the time was right at the end of the regional semis, he has to hit some big shots. A guy like Chris Seeley, who was a seldom used bench player, who came in and had to defend a big guy at the district finals. So all these different examples. I can think of an example when I coached in the regional semifinal. A kid off our bench hit a three at the buzzer of the third quarter that just kind of totally changed the momentum of that game. All these different moments, right, Shane? And as you watch tournaments now, you see it. We're recording this show sort of right in the middle of the boys sectional. The girls district's kind of underway here, and I saw it last night in a game at the school I work at Uniota, when Uniota was playing Sheridan in a sectional semifinal game, and Sheridan would toward the second half, fourth quarter, was running an extra guy at Blake Fitch, who's the point guard for Uniota, and the guy who does the lion's share of the ball handling. I mean, really, most of the year the ball's been in his hands, and Sheridan took the ball out of his hands. And how so many guys for Uniota had to step up under a lot of pressure, a lot of full court pressure, whether it be Ashton Crace or Blake Hoops or Caden Cutright or Newton, all these, even KB Perkins had to step to the backcourt some as a big guy and help handle it. How important do you think it is, Shane, just once you get into tournament play? Yes, you have to have that quote unquote stud, right? But you have to have these other guys who can do multiple things. Otherwise, eventually you get exposed.
Well, I love how you said that because, when I was talking about the star player, the star player can be the one that goes and gets the bucket, can be the one that puts you on his or her back there for a round or two of the tournament, but it also can demand the extra attention, the way you're talking about the outstanding point guard there, Fitch, for Uniota. And what that can do is it can open up opportunities for some of these other players. The problem is what separates sometimes the good team from what ends up being the great team. Are the other kids able to step up and make those plays round after round? Now, in that particular game there, it sounds like the answer for Uniota was absolutely yes. And the more and more that happens, because we always joke a little bit, hope is or isn't a strategy, but
Right.
sometimes when you're outmanned, let's face it, we try to take away someone's strengths, and we say a little bit in our scouting report, we're going to play the percentages there. We got to hope that person, can't beat us in those situations. Or you'll hear a coach say, and I don't always love this, because again, I hate doing this in scouting reports, but you'll say, hey, if that kid there can hit that shot all night, you just got to tip your cap to him. We've all probably been there before. That's not ideal. But again, think about what you're saying. Those are all a result of elite players. If you didn't have an elite player, why wouldn't we just match our 5 up on your 5 and guard you? So be clear here when we're talking about that clip. The star can score it, but the star just being on the court, the star just being active in the game, draws so many eyeballs. It ended up drawing so much attention on film in the week leading up to the game that a lot of times that goes in to some of that as well. So I think looking back on that clip, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no doubt. I think those special teams, like you say, have the guy or the girl who's the go-to, but also have all those other pieces too. In this next clip, Shayne, we talk a little bit about, and I think you had brought this up originally when we did the show. Sometimes tournaments come down to matchups, the seeding process, right? Just some different things once the bracket comes out that jump out to you. I got a couple thoughts on this, but let's go ahead and play the clip first.
The second thing on my list, and I want to see if it related to anything on your list, would be matchups. I think matchups are unique. I mean, the way we do our seeding in most areas of Ohio, we're getting to the point where we're stretching out a little bit more, and I do think we're getting more of our best teams to the correct levels. I think we're still lacking in some fair matchups and maybe in the earlier rounds, but overall, I just told you I watched, like here in our area, 95% of the best teams are going to the regional. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things on the girls' side, and 95, if not 100% of the best boys teams are heading to the district as we speak. So I mean, I do think talent is winning out, so to speak. But I also think they're something that can turn a district semifinal run into a regional semifinal run in a hurry. Can sometimes just be a matchup of, man, we don't match up real well with this team, but if we can stay away from them, we're good enough to beat anyone else on a given night. That type of thing. Just your take on matchups over the year, because when you put your 20-2, 19-3 teams aside, and you kind of get into the middle of the pack, a lot of times there's not a huge difference between, say, a 16-win team and a 12-win team, and there's a bunch of those sometimes right there in those middle bracket games. Just your thoughts on matchups.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, like you just mentioned, talent seems to win out early in the tournament a lot of times too. I think though, when you're talking about making those deeper runs, especially what I had written down right here, and I think it kind of goes with what you're talking about, is you have to be able to win different styles of games. I think to make deep runs, you have to be able to win multiple styles, because the matchups you're talking about, I've said it all along, if you're the type of team that plays one way, a certain way, chances are you're eventually going to run into somebody else that plays that way, and they're better than you at it. And that's a scary feeling as a coach, and I've had that feeling. I can tell you, we played, one of the times that we were fortunate enough to make it to the regionals, we ran into a John Glenn team that ended up winning the state championship. And we got up and down the floor and played pretty fast. I mean, that was our style of play. Well, it didn't take me very long to figure out that they played that way too, and were way better at it than we were, and all of a sudden now, what do you do? And I think as a coach, sometimes it's tough, because think about this. All right. If you've played a certain way all year, and all of a sudden you look at your team in the regional tournament and say, listen, we can't play this way. We're going to have to change what we do. Well, you're immediately telling your team that you don't think they're as good as their opponent. Okay. I mean, that's the first thing that's happening there, but maybe that's necessary too, right? Sometimes you have to do that. I've done both ways, and that John Glenn team I'm talking about, we went ahead and we played the way we play, and we got drilled. But I've also,
We had that undefeated team the year you ran into the Chillicothe team, right?
Yeah. Well, that again, we didn't, and we weren't necessarily the same style. But again, they were so much better than us no matter what we tried. It seemed like it didn't work out tonight. But to give you an example, the year before we played that Chillicothe team in the districts, and we slowed things down. We played real methodical. They were a little surprised by that, hadn't seen that. We were actually ahead at halftime in that game. Because we did change styles, and my team accepted that and said, "Okay, listen, we know how talented this team are. We're gonna have to be different." Now, again, did talent went out in the second half? Yeah, they came after us, they pressed us, they turned us over a little bit, and they out athleted us. But yeah, so I've tried it both ways. My point is, I think it's really dangerous if you're only able to win one type of game. If you're only able to win a game that's up and down the court and in the mid 60s to low 70s, what happens when that one team's good enough to get you in a half court game? If you're only capable of winning games in the 40s, what happens on those nights? You just got to score more than that. So I think that eventually, if you can only win one way, you're going to run into problems as you get deeper into the tournament. I think the teams that can win a slow-paced game, a fast-paced game, an ugly win, as people call it sometimes, or you see what I'm getting at there, Shayne. Maybe you can help explain that even better a little bit.
Well, I think it's just definitely something that's going to come about throughout the course of a tournament run, especially like you said. Okay, if your talent dominates the opponent, say in the sectional final and then district semi, you're going to start to get to teams that are obviously better or as good as you get into the district final. Really, that's why they're there. So I think those style of games become really, really important. I think the couple times you've gone 22-0 there at Benton County, we used to talk about that. You would come out of a game where you'd feel like, man, the other team just dictated everything. And, I remember telling you found a way to win. You're not going to go 22-0 without being able to win 3-4 different. It's the same thing here in the tournament. The way things are magnified in the tournament, I don't think you can win. Let's say you get your bye in the sectional, where a lot of these sectional brackets just require you to win one and get out. I don't think you're going to be able to win 5-6 games in a row without, like you said, winning a game that's probably played 10 to 15 points under what you normally average, and maybe even 10 to 15 points above what you average. And I think that's where you have to have a little bit of talent, a little bit of offense. At some point, I don't care how well you guard, you got to score.
So Shayne, after listening to that, you talked a little bit about the matchups and how that matters sometimes. How you kind of fall in the bracket and who might win a game, who might lose a game before you or whatever. But a couple of things jumped out at me now, especially a year later. The seeding process has changed, right? We've talked about that a little bit. I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit, really, in our basketball shows this year about how it's went to a computer point system now. So when these brackets came out, you immediately got some really, I don't want to say weird matchups, but you got some matchups where you almost felt like the quote unquote underdog by seed wasn't too much of an underdog, you know what I mean? Just based on how it came out. I know just looking at the Division II bracket that I was obviously looking at, because two schools that I care a lot about, right, are Division II and Uniota and Benton County and boys basketball. And as I looked at it immediately, there's, Benton County's had a great years all the way down to the 10 seed. Has to go on the road to play Jackson for the second time in 2 weeks, and it didn't work out well for him. That's always tough to do that right after you play a team and beat them a week or so ago, and then have to go to their place. I immediately noticed Fairfield Union going to Megs. There's no way in the world that I would have put Fairfield Union as an underdog in that game, even though they were a 9 seed, knowing what both teams have. And sure enough, Fairfield Union went down there and won. But you see some of those things now, Shayne, with the new seeding process, where you're not sure when you look at these things really. But I know you're talking more in matchups of the X's and O's. When you watch teams play, how do they actually match up? Talk a little bit about, I've got a couple thoughts myself, but talk a little bit about that, just the matchups and how you've seen that this year come to fruition.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is when it's a one and done format, the way it is in a March Madness or in high school as we're talking here, you're not playing the 14 game league schedule where you can maybe have one or two bumps in the road and still compete for a title. You're not talking about a best of three, best of five, or even like best of seven at the NBA level. In the one and done format, you can oftentimes come into a matchup that just doesn't lend itself to you. I think in the girls' side, as soon as the bracket had come out, I think of the Huntington Alexander game I watched here recently. Being an SVC person and then having family down at Alexander, that's one that caught my attention immediately. And I immediately had told some SVC people, I don't like that matchup for Huntington.
Right.
Knowing Huntington's a really good basketball team, probably about 16, 17 wins this year, but it's a situation where Huntington it really, really dominates a lot of times the turnover and the rebounding stats that you and I talk so much about. Well, Alexander has great young guard play, not going to live ball turnover it in the backcourt very often. They're going to compete in some of those categories. And it just kind of offset. It was a great game back and forth, and Alexander ended up getting them, but it was just kind of a matchup thing. I didn't think Huntington played poorly. It's just I thought it was a matchup thing that really put Huntington in a tough sectional final match. And the only other thing I'd say to that, I guess it goes back to our first topic of the night. More than ever now with the seeding situation, it goes back a little bit to the importance of regular season. I can think of three or four dangerous teams or teams that I would have labeled as dangerous um, throughout the tournament. I think of the Paint Valley boys. They had to go to Portsmouth, really good boys basketball team. I thought of the Waverly girls had to go play Athens, the TBC champion. These are teams that they were two or three regular season wins away, Matt, from possibly in the seeding matchup getting in a much more favorable position where they become really, really dangerous. Does that make sense? So sometimes people think, oh, they lost the sectional, they weren't good enough to win the sectional. But in reality, I can think of both of those teams I'm referring to and several other examples where they lost a couple overtime games during the year. They blew some leads in the final 2-3 minutes of regulation a couple times. What happens if they bump up three or four regular season wins and now all of a sudden their seed bumps up a line or two?
Right.
Now all of a sudden they're in a matchup that's a little different. So when you think of matchups, it is an X and O thing as we talked about. But now I think in the current setting that we talked so much about the seeding, I think it becomes really important to value each and every game because sometimes we have a tendency in the regular season in high school, even as fans, to say, well, that's just a non-league game.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden now that's your winning percentage, and then that's their winning percentage, and that could be the difference on playing this team, which you're probably not beating in the sectional, compared to playing this team, which all of a sudden is a great matchup in the sectional.
Well, and let me take it a step further, Shayne. With the true road games now in the sectional semifinals, and last year was even the finals, but this year the semis. It's even more important because now, like last night, we watched an entire Division II boys slate of teams that had to take bus rides, in some cases long bus rides, to play on the road in a hostile environment. And again, we could talk about the importance. In all honesty, we could talk about the importance of that as one of your reasons for teams making a tournament run is the ability to play on the road, obviously, just playing away from home, right? But that's what you're talking about. What if you win one or two more of those, then all of a sudden that flips, and you're the 8 and they're the
Hmm.
9? That's a
Yeah.
big difference. Um, we talked in that clip too. We talked a little bit about just being able to play multiple styles. I've seen that in the tournament too. A team will get stuck in a style they're not comfortable with. All of a sudden, a team that's scoring in the 60s and 70s gets, for whatever reason, a cold shooting night, tempo, foul trouble, who knows? They get stuck in a game that's in the 30s or in the low 40s. And all of a sudden, it's like deer in the headlights. They don't quite know how to play that, right? Because they haven't been used to playing that. I think teams that are great tournament teams are able to win different types of games. And we talked about that a little bit in that clip, but maybe we can expand on that a little bit, Shayne. I mean, after all, what if you see a different defense, a zone you weren't expecting? What if you see a box and one on your star player? What if you typically press and get your points off that, but one night you're pressing and the points aren't coming. You're not turning the other team over. All those different situations, Shane, I think go into what we just talked about in that clip of trying to just being able to be versatile as a team and win different types of games.
Let me throw this style thing at you, Matt, because this is and I hope I don't go too far off the tournament thing. I'll circle back to the tournament, but I just want to get your general idea on this style. I think the tournament is the ultimate test of your style and of the multiple styles you're referencing that you can play. And see if you follow me on this logic. Sometimes summer is fool's gold. Sometimes preseason is fool's gold because maybe you press, maybe you zone, maybe you do some trapping and run and jump. And you may be playing a team down 2 starters in the summer. You may be playing a team, you may be playing with 10, 11, 12 people in the summer at a tournament where someone else may be playing their third game of the day with 6 kids. They may be down their point guard. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Same way in the preseason. Maybe they've had a football or a volleyball run and they're late getting in and they haven't quite been over that yet. And as the regular season goes, even your bottom teams get a little bit better at handling the ball, a little bit better at pressure. They've had more film study. They've had a little bit more ball handling. They've just had the ball in their hands for 2, 3 months now. By the time you get to the tournament, it seems like that's the ultimate test. Even the really low versus high seed games, you're getting their best effort, right? You're getting their finished product. You're getting that. So do you follow what I'm saying there about the tournament being the ultimate style test in terms of you seeing if you can put your, just absolutely force your will on someone, but at the same time, if forced to change up a little bit, you're able to do so, and you're able to do so at a high level.
Yeah, because it's kind of funny, Shane, by the time you get to tournament, especially in today's day and age with the film and how readily available film is, you have no secrets anymore. Like it's going to be extremely hard for you to trick somebody come tournament time. I mean, unless you've had something up your sleeve and you've never shown it, and all of a sudden you're going to break this out. And now think about that. If you do that at tournament time, you're running a risk, right? Because you're telling your team, hey, we've got to try something we've never tried before. Here it is. So now you're doing something that you've never done before in the most important game of your year, probably, right? So that in itself is kind of a dangerous approach, or can be. Now, sometimes that's the right way to go. You got to pull something out. You got to pull a rabbit out of the hat if you're an underdog or whatever. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is, except for those rare situations, typically you sort of know what you're getting from the other team. And it comes down to, coaches have watched buku amount of film on each, they've got the scout report, they've got all your calls, they've got all your sets. You call an out of bounds play, the other coach is jumping up, here he comes, everything, right? So it comes down to really at that point, which team is, like you say, capable of just of digging in and getting the job done and doing things just better, executing better, being tougher, playing through adversity, being mentally tough when things don't go your way, all these things, right? So no, I agree with that 100%. Shane, as we dive into this next clip, you had brought this up on the last time we did the show, or episode 49. You had mentioned luck, right? And as you say in this clip, hey, I don't want to make it sound like it's just all matter of luck, but you mentioned here that there is a little bit of luck involved in a tournament run, and that you got to be good, but you got to catch a few breaks too. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
One of the things I had down is luck. It's one of those things where you see these buzzer beaters and these last second shots and they're going to the video and all that. Sometimes it may be to send it in overtime, but sometimes it's if it goes in, we move on. And if it doesn't go in, you move on. And it's one of those where I guess you could look at injuries. You could look at that bang bang call in the fourth quarter. You could look at upsets in your bracket. We talked about that earlier. Maybe there's that incredible team that's in the waiting on you in the district final, and then all of a sudden in the district semis, I watched some state ranked teams get knocked off over in the central district in the sectional play and district semifinal play. So is it wrong to call that luck or good fortune or what? What's your take on that?
Oh, I think look, I mean, we can sit here and act like, hey, we're really smart. We're going to break this thing down, but there is luck involved. I mean, my coach in high school used to say you have to be really good and you have to catch some good breaks. And I think he's right. You do have to have that. I mean, very seldom do you see a team make a run, let's say, especially to a state tournament level run or a state championship, and not look back and say, oh man, that could have all ended on that night right there if this wouldn't have happened or that wouldn't have happened. The run I was a part of in high school, I guarantee you there were 2 or 3 times where you're like, holy man. I mean, nobody even be talking about us. If that wouldn't have happened right there, we'd have been beaten in the section or the district. And then all of a sudden, you catch a break and then you make your own breaks by, what you do, obviously. And then before you know it, you make this deep run. But injuries, you mentioned that, plays a huge part in it. Huge part in it. My senior year of high school, one of our best players broke his hand at a pep rally. I mean, think about that for a minute. The day of a district championship game, he broke his hand in a skit at a pep rally. So it's you don't ever know, what might happen or what could happen. With any one and done situation, that's why I always say, like, when you watch like sports at the professional level where it's a best of 7, very seldom. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, Shayne, but it seems to me like very seldom when it's a best of, do you get major upsets. Very seldom do you not get the best teams winning a best of 5, best of 7, because it's that even if you catch lightning in a bottle and you pull that upset one night, you have to prove over the course of a series that you're the better team. But when you're dealing with high school basketball and it's on any given night and you're dealing with 16, 17-year-old kids, weird things can happen. And you do have to catch some break. Now, Shayne, we're going to get back into that segment. I'm actually going to kind of pause that here in the middle of that thought, all right, from episode 49, because I want to ask you this. We talk a little bit about upsets, right, and how upsets can occur, and a team can throw one in from half court, a team can surprise you on a given night. You play bad, they play good, but I don't know that we've talked a lot on these on our show about the actual term upset and what goes into an upset. I want to take a minute here just to talk about what things do you think actually happen? Because this is a fascinating topic to me. Like, because I've made comments before to my assistant coaches when we were the favorite in a game and things were going bad early. I've actually made comments to I know it's hard to believe that I have moments of negativity over on the bench, but I know my assistants over the years will be shocked to hear that. But I would say to them, gosh, guys, this worries me. I mean, some of the things that are happening here have upset written all over them. And what I mean by that, well, I want to hear your thoughts first, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. But what are some things that you think go into an upset? You see an upset in March Madness on college, or you see it at the high school level, and you look back and you think, gosh, what are some of the things that cause that? What are things? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but what jumps out at you as to reasons why those things happen?
Well, I think it's the beauty of basketball and how it happens so sudden. You know what I mean? It could be a great start. It could be what did we always say? We hear a team, oh, that we're letting them hang around. We're letting them hang around, right? So now every call matters a little bit more. The foul trouble matters a little bit more. And if you think about it, when those sudden things have a burst for the underdog, a lot of times it can induce panic, or it can induce a little bit of a rush from the team that's favored. I use this example all the time. I say in volleyball is a sport where you don't get a lot of upsets, right? Well, think about the nature of it. You go out, I've seen plenty of teams lose the first set, and they may lose them bad.
Right.
Well, but you start the second set 0-0, right? If that underdog comes out in the first quarter in basketball and they shoot 5 of 6 from the 3-point line in the first quarter and they're up 8, they start the second quarter up 8. If your best player was awful in the first set in volleyball, she comes back out and plays the second set. What if your best player in basketball picked up 2 or 3 fouls in the first quarter? Well, now that's going to affect the whole 4 quarters of the game. So basketball is so sudden that I think oftentimes an early impact is huge. But then I've also seen examples where the team kind of hangs around, and before you know it, you're into the fourth quarter, and there they are with a chance. So I think the things that to answer your question more directly, are things that the underdog probably does at a high level, probably over their head, if we're being honest, in a short spurt of the game. A lot of times at the beginning, or a lot of times, third quarter coming out of the half, that kind of puts you there to have a chance in the end. And that's probably the number one characteristic I can think of. And then what that does is, because of pressure or whatever you want to relate it to, the favorite probably plays down the other way, right? A shot that you normally would make, they don't. Maybe this particular kid's 85% from the line, but on that night he or she was 2 for 6. You know what I mean? Now, is that just because they're 2 for 6, or was there a little pressure involved, or so forth? So, if you think about it with me again in my analogy of top and bottom, the bottom plays a little over their head, puts the pressure on the top dog. They come down a little bit, and before you know it, you're in a dogfight. And again, in a one and done format, anything can happen.
Yeah, Shane, so interesting. As we always say, we don't talk a lot before the show. I had kind of a similar thought as you showed your spectrum of high low, right? When I thought really specifically about this, I really tried to think specifically like a couple of actual little X and O items maybe that happen in a game, or statistical items. And as I see these upsets happen, if you think about it, you got a team who on the high end, so let's say there's a 60 possession basketball game, let's just say for the sake of argument, and you've got this team who's favored to win. And the idea is that they are going to have a much easier time throughout that 60 possession game of scoring during those possessions and stopping the other team from scoring. Or you could say the underdog's going to have a hard time scoring and a hard time stopping the other team from scoring, right? But what starts to close that gap is when I think two big things, a lot of things, and you mentioned a few, but I'm saying a couple jump out at me. When the favored team starts getting careless with the ball and having turnovers, I've seen a lot of this, like I should just say wasted possessions. Because a lot of times I think the favored team comes out loosey goosey and, hey, we're the favorite, let's go play. And let's say they jack up a couple off balance shots early, they don't go in. Let's say they throw a couple one handed, try to thread the needle type passes, ball gets kicked out of bounds. Next thing you know, okay, well, now that 60 possession game, you've just wasted 20 possessions at the end of the night. So now it's you've got 40 possessions to score on. And then what if on that same night, and you see this sometimes, the underdog shoots the three well? I think the three is the great equalizer. I think in a lot of upsets, you see the three.
No
at
question.
The college level, the high school level. So now all of a sudden, you're careless with the ball as the favorite. You turn it over. You have wasted possessions. Your chances to score go down a little bit. All of a sudden, the underdog shoots the lights out. Guess what? They come up a little bit. And before you know it, you're in a dogfight. You're in more of an evenly matched game than you ever expected. And I like what you said, because this happens all the time, especially at the high school level. The favorite tends to tighten up a little bit when they look at that scoreboard and think, "Oh my God, what's happening here? This isn't supposed to be happening. This is embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
If we get beat, this is the end of our season." Panic starts to set in, and you know what the underdog's doing at that time? They're playing with house money, because they weren't even supposed to be in this game in the fourth quarter, and they're pinning their ears back and playing. That's the beauty of sports. It's not real beautiful when you're the favorite and you're going through it, but it's the beauty of sports, right?
And that neutral site, the neutral fan oftentimes is like,
oh yeah,
they get behind the underdog, right? It's kind of a cool story. This team's got a chance to win. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like people aren't typically the average fan there is not cheering for the team that wins all the time, right? They're wanting that underdog to get one.
Sure.
In this next, well, actually the same segment, Shane. Let's just jump back into it. Let's just jump right back in right here, and we'll finish our thought from 49 and then come back.
Is you'll hear the sports cliche of, sometimes you don't pick the year picks you. And I want you to think about how true this is. Like, there's some years where, hey, we're really good this year, we got a chance. And then sometimes one of these things happen to you where you lose in double overtime in the district semifinal or whatever happens. And it's just, we did right here on this YouTube channel, people can go back and look at the Why Not Us, the awesome piece we put together on your Uniota basketball team, state finals. And you could follow those things, and you could see where you could have lost in the sectional, you could have lost in the district semi, you could have, you know what I'm saying, like all the way through. There was all kinds of things that had to happen the right way. But a lot of times you'll then think, we may not be quite as good this year. This may be more of a rebuilding. Before you know it, you find yourself looking at your tournament bracket, and you're like, wait a minute, we can win that game, and we can win that game. And before you know it, you're playing for a district championship with a chance to go to the regional. So I've seen that in a lot of cases where I know in baseball sometimes, if I look back, two or three of my best teams got stuck in Division III playing teams that went on to go to the regional final or even state in Division III, where other teams that you would think, well, that's a rebuilding year for Paint Valley. Well, we had a stud pitcher, a Division I college pitcher, and a really good catcher. And before you know it, we're in the regional. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like, it's one of those things that where, like, I think you really do have to attack each year with this the same vision and the same purpose, because this stuff has a funny way of working itself out.
That is an interesting take. I do think, and maybe it goes along a little bit with catching the breaks, right? But it's like it is kind of, are you fortunate enough to have your best team on the right year in the right place, the right time, right? I've been a part of runs. I was a part of a run as a player where the number one team in the state got upset in the sectional championship. We made it to the state tournament, and the St. Henry team that was so dominant with Bobby Hoying, that had just, kind of really killed Southeastern the year before in the state tournament, right? They all of a sudden dropped to Division IV, and we don't have to play them at the state tournament.
Right.
I always tell my friends from Southeastern, we'd have beat them anyway, but that wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So we were glad they dropped to Division IV. But so it's just these little things like you're talking about, right? Where just how sort of that draw works out. I've also, as a coach, unfortunately, been to the regionals twice when, we were beaten by the eventual state champion. And so, all these things, I guess, Shayne, go into sort of a little bit of the luck, right, of the draw. Shayne, right there in that short little segment we just finished, you had mentioned sometimes the year picks you, and I thought that was interesting as I thought back about that comment, and you explained a little bit about what you meant right there, and I gave an example. What jumps out at me sometimes, and we've probably all been guilty of this, I think I have, honestly, is if you're not careful, you go into a tournament run with sort of a preconceived notion of what either your team's capable of doing, or even if you're trying to predict what another team's going to do, well, they're probably, look at this bracket, that's probably the end of the road for them. And all of a sudden, that team gets beat. The team that you thought was the end of the road gets beat. How many times you see in the college tournament, a 14 seed will beat a 3, and what a great story. They got him an NCAA tournament win, and chances are they won't go any further. But what a great! Oh, wait a minute. You say the 11 seed won too. Now they're going to play. You know what I mean? So all of a sudden now it's not just one win; they got a chance to win another game. And you see it all the time, where you see some team get to the Sweet 16 that you thought had no chance of getting there because there were multiple upsets and they were playing each other, and all kinds of crazy things can happen. Don't you feel like it's important not to put a ceiling on your team, but to go in with an open mind, just one game at a time, and never knowing what will happen along the trail?
Well, I think that's so important. And I would even argue with coaching all the way back into your off season, your preseason, throughout the season, you owe it to your program, you owe it to your kids, you owe it to all your coaches, to your fan base, to attack each and every day as if you are assuming you're going to catch one of those breaks that you're describing, right? It's
Right.
with it being one of my favorite times of year, not just tournament basketball time, but then what happens is tournament basketball ends up, we transition right into baseball, right? So you've heard me mention the Reds on the show before, where I think the Reds have been guilty of that. Like, we're big Reds fans. Like last year, some people were upset with them at the trade deadline because they didn't do anything, because they felt like they were going to be really good here for these next 4 or 5 years. Well, hopefully they are, okay? But my point is, how many times in our lifetime have the Reds been in first place on August 1st? You see what I'm saying? So,
Right.
like, why are we picking and choosing what year it happens. It's because you don't know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? You're coming into spring training. Now Matt McLean might be banged up here for 5 to 7 days, and you're this or that, and this pitcher's toe hurts, and this pitcher's elbow. You don't know. So, like in the tournament setting that you're referring to, if you bring that back into a high school basketball setting, you don't know who's going to lose in that other bracket. You don't
Right.
know. You may come through an injury, but the team you're going to play may have an injury. You may have a kid just absolutely shoot lights out and go nuts, and like you said, have a role player hit 6 7 threes in a game. There's so many things again in the one and done that can happen. You owe it to yourself to assume that every time is your time. You know what I mean? Like if you, I would never want to just put all my eggs in one basket. Think, okay, if we don't do it this year, we'll never do it. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to ever say, well, we most likely won't do it this year, next year, the year after that. I just think that's a bad way to go about it. I know it's cliche, but you really have to approach each time like it's your time.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Shane. I think it kind of leads into our final clip we're going to share here tonight, which was I think the last point we made in episode 49, where we talked a little bit about experience. Let's go ahead and listen to that. That experience comes into play too a little bit. Like I feel like teams that make runs have kids who have at least been a part of maybe a little bit of a smaller run before. In other words, last year we made it to the district finals and we got knocked off. Well, this year,
Yeah.
guys, we're going a step further. We're going to make it, we're going to the regionals this year, and you kind of have that attitude of it's our turn to sort of take one more step. And it's that experience factor, regardless of the experience of your coach. And I think that can help too, but really the experience of your players, you know what I'm saying? What they've been through as a group already.
No, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you said that. I did have the word experience up on the guard play actually that I mentioned earlier. I think that's really, really important.
Obviously, just a short clip there, Shane, but I think it leads to maybe an interesting discussion here to close out our show. But experience in the tournament, obviously, I feel like in anything you do in life, the more you've been through it, probably the more you're prepared to go through it. We talked a little bit about how, if a team made it to a certain level the year before, they kind of expect to advance a little bit further or whatever. But I think beyond just that confidence factor, I think it's the ability. The one thing I think experience shows up more than anything in tournament is the ability to sort of handle adversity when it happens, because I see talented young players who it's one thing to handle adversity in game 9 of the season. And, in the mind of a high school kid, okay, if we lose this game, life goes on and we move forward and we play. When all of a sudden there's this finality of, if we lose tonight, our season's over. And I think sometimes it's easy to really push the panic button a little bit. And I think that happens with younger guys than it does maybe some of your older players. And even though I think seniors sometimes, are concerned that, hey, this might be my last game, I still think the seniors who have had a lot of varsity experience, they tend to handle those situations a little better. And I think sometimes seniors, as we talk about seniors here, as they see, yes, there's this pressure on them of this could be it. But I've also seen seniors really perform with a sense of urgency in those situations too. I can remember our high school coach, Ron Lovely, used to say when I started coaching with him, he goes, a lot of times in a tournament, there may be a stretch in one of the games where you go with your seniors. Even if there's a couple seniors that don't play as much typically, you may put them in. And I saw moments over the years where that came true. When I was a senior in high school, we had a kid by the name of Jason Thornsberry who came out in a sectional game where we were an underdog in and knocked down a couple early threes. I want to say, I can't remember. I think maybe he had high teen points that night, if I remember correctly. I mean, it really, really sparked us. A kid, and he was a kid off our bench that typically, didn't play that role. But again, I think Coach Lovely recognized that, hey, I'm going to rally around my seniors here. But I think the reason that is the experience factor. Just knowing that these kids have sort of been battle tested and kind of been through those wars. So, I guess what's your before we close out the show, Shane, touch on experience for a minute.
Yeah, I love that example there because I think with experience, the reason that calmness takes over is because by the time you go through the program, and this is why it's so important to have your junior high and your JV and your varsity and your practices and your film session, because by the time what you're describing, Matt, some of these kids in today's game, they're 60, 70, 80, 90 games into their career. And so there's probably not a whole lot they haven't seen. They're not going to be shook up by getting face guarded or by the run and jump or by the junk defense. They've played out in front. They've played from behind. They've seen Coach Combs really mad. They've seen Coach Combs really patient. You see what I'm saying? There's
Yeah.
probably nothing that's going to come about in your huddle, in your adjustments, in your different that is going to shock them. I think a lot of times in that calmness comes from understanding the situation, understanding how to react, understanding I've been here, done this before. And that's not to say young teams that are very talented can't do it. It means that they are probably more likely to get shook in some of those situations or those particular things. And I would even add that the elite senior leaders have a special ability to instill some of that calmness and some of that in their younger players. It may not be the same exact thing for the senior and the sophomore, but in that moment, the true leaders have just kind of a unique ability to understand, hey, I'm going to need this person right here. Hey, we're going to need you to make that shot. Stay with it here. Do you know what I mean? And just those types of things. So, yeah, I don't think there's any question that the experience of going through something, especially when it's so stressful. You used the word a couple times tonight. It's so final, right? It's I think that's really, really important when you can turn to people who have been there and been through it.
Yeah, I agree, Shane. I don't have a ton of final thoughts, but and I'm just going to mention this, and then I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you can kind of give your thoughts and wrap the show up, okay? But I guess this goes along a little bit, kind of with what you're saying right there. I think the one thing about tournaments that you have to understand right from the word go is they're just different. I mean, tournaments just different. I mean, I think anybody who's ever coached will tell you they feel different when tournament time comes. There's a little different level of butterflies in their stomach. There's a little different level of preparation. There's just a different excitement that goes along with it. I think players sort of get that too, and it's just you know to say that the tournament is just the same as a regular season game is just not true. It's just a whole different animal. It's kind of like in baseball. Why is it harder to get 3 outs in the ninth inning than it is the seventh inning? Well, it just is. That's why you pay the closer all that money, right? Because it's just those
Hmm.
3 outs are tougher than 3 outs 30 minutes earlier. Okay. So, it's just a different animal. And I think some of the things we talked about in episode 49 and then went back and listened to tonight and kind of commented on go toward that. It's an exciting time. It's fun for fans. It's fun for players. It's fun for coaches. But it's just, I think there's a uniqueness about tournament.
Yeah, the final thought, I guess, because some of this is really fun. This show is fun for fans and for basketball junkies like us, but we always try to turn it back to coaching. We've always tried to turn it back to professional development. And I guess the one thing that I would recall upon show 49 and again tonight is embrace it, right? It's that, it's that one and done format. Everybody has a chance. That's what makes high school basketball so cool. Everybody has a chance, no matter what's happened throughout the regular season. You're into the bracket, and you have that opportunity to cut down a section on that, and then play for a district, go to a regional, and so forth. And everyone has that opportunity. We've had plenty of examples over the years where we have had a team that's had 5, 6, 7 wins make a run to the regional. Um, it can happen. So always embrace the opportunity. Always, as we said a second ago, treat each year like it's the year, and don't allow yourself to fall into that trap of, oh, we're probably not good enough to do this. Maybe next year, because that's just not a good way to compete. And again, I love the opportunity the postseason gives everybody. Well, Matt, on that note, well, probably a good place to get out of here this week as we get back on the tournament trail. By the time we come back, we're probably going to have some district nets being cut down and getting into the Sweet 16 rounds and so forth. So good luck to all the high school teams out there. Again, go back and check out show 49. I hope you've enjoyed show 70 here, Expanding the Zone. Remember, 100.9 FM is 7:30 a.m. Monday through Friday. Check out Matt and myself joining JJ Hell throughout the week. Talk a little up and atom sports. And then again, make sure good thank you to Dr. Chris Good. Make sure you're checking us out there on YouTube as well as your podcast app here to get Expanding the Zone as we continue to come at you a few more times here during the basketball postseason run. And then looking forward to some baseball turning into spring here real soon. So Matt, great to talk some hoops with you. We'll be back at it next week. Appreciate everybody listening. Thanks, everyone.
You always did your best, 'cause inside you knew in one shining moment you reached for the sky. In one shining moment you knew, yeah. In one shining moment you're willing to try. In one shining moment you knew. One shine.